Hey everyone, I'm Erin and I'm an educator at the North Carolina Aquarium at Fort Fisher. Today we're going to be exploring ecosystems, which is one of my very favorite topics to talk about because it gives you the chance to look at the big picture of how non-living things and living things, all living things, live in the same ecosystem and interact with each other. At the aquarium, it's really important for us to learn about our animals' natural ecosystems and their natural behaviors in those ecosystems so that we can recreate that as closely as possible in our aquarium habitats. So for example, if an animal lives in an ecosystem that has a lot of hiding spots and really likes to hide, we need to make sure that our aquarium habitat has a lot of hiding spots for that animal. By doing that, we can keep our animals happy and healthy. Okay, let's get started. So first, what is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is made of two main factors, our abiotic factors and our biotic factors. Abiotic factors are non-living things that are in our ecosystem, and biotic factors are our living things that are in an ecosystem. Some examples of non-living abiotic factors in an ecosystem are the amount of sunlight, the kind of material that's on the bottom of the ecosystem, so it could be sand, rocks, or dirt, and also the kind of water and amount of water that is in that ecosystem. Now, no two ecosystems are created the same, and they each have their own unique non-living abiotic factors. So the two examples that I like to use are the desert and the deep sea. If we think about the desert, that has a lot of sunlight and not a lot of water. So the animals that live in the desert have to adapt or change over time in order to be able to survive in the desert. Now let's flip it and think about the deep sea, which doesn't have exactly the opposite of the desert, but kind of. The deep sea does not have a lot of sunlight, but has a lot of water, a lot of salt water. So the animals that live in the deep sea have to adapt to those abiotic non-living factors in a different way than those animals that live in the desert. So our living things are having to adapt or change over time to the non-living things that are in their ecosystem. So our living things are put into three different categories. We have our producers who are producing their own energy. They can create their own food by using the sun and water. So they are called producers, and they are our plants. So flowers, trees, grass, all of those green things. Then we have our consumers, who are usually animals, just like you and me, and our bald eagle here. So consumers cannot produce their own energy, and they need to eat in order to get that energy. I would love to be able to just stand out in the sun when I was hungry and be full that way. I would save a lot of money on groceries, but unfortunately, humans are consumers, so we need to eat in order to survive and get our energy. Then we have our decomposers, who are breaking down dead things and getting energy that way. And they are also putting that energy back into the soil so that our producers can use. So here's what makes up an ecosystem. Our non-living factors, such as sunlight, rocks, or sand, or dirt, and water, and our living factors, which are our producers, or plants, consumers, most animals, and decomposers. Now, when we talk about ecosystems, it's important to talk about food webs and food chains to learn about how each of those living things are connected to each other. And those food webs and food chains show how living things are connected through their energy flow. So all energy starts from the sun. Remember, our producers are using that energy are using the sun to create their own energy. So we have our sun here, source of all energy, and that gets transferred to the leaves or our plants. Then the energy that's in the leaves from the sun gets passed on to the caterpillar. How does the leaves pass that energy on to the caterpillar? the caterpillar eats the leaves. Same thing with our snake. The snake gets the energy from the caterpillar by eating the caterpillar. And same with the owl. The owl gets the energy from the snake by eating the snake. And our decomposers get the energy from the leaves, caterpillar, snake, and owl after they die, and the decomposers break that down, get energy for themselves, and put that energy back in the soil, which is then recycled back through the plants, back through our producers. So when we talk about food webs and food chains, it's important to remember that our arrows are showing that energy flow. They're not necessarily showing what eats what. It's showing how that energy is flowing through the ecosystem. So if we went by the arrows, it would say that the sun eats the leaves eat the caterpillar eats the snake, so on and so on. But that is not true. The arrows are showing how that energy is being transferred. And that energy transfer is what connects all of us, all living things, and what makes every animal, no matter how small or how icky or yucky, they are all important. So to reiterate that, I'm going to show you a quick little example of a food chain. So here in our food chain here, we have an alligator that eats the bird. This is a blue heron. And the bird eats a fish. This is called a bluegill. So let's say we take away alligators from this food chain. All the alligators are gone from this ecosystem. So you might think, oh, that's great. There's no alligators now, so our birds can flourish. There can be a lot of birds, which would be true. There would be a lot more birds. However, these birds are all going to eventually eat all of our fish. And now if we don't have any fish, what's going to happen to the birds? Eventually, they aren't going to have anything to eat, and they're going to pass away as well. So So this shows that when we just take away one animal from a simple food chain, it affects all of the other animals, which again makes every animal important in their food chain, no matter how small. So we're going to talk about the maritime forest, and I'm going to talk about a food web pyramid for that maritime forest to talk about those biotic or living factors. So in our food web pyramid, our producers are on the very bottom. The producers are the base of all food webs and food chains and ecosystems. Producers are, I like to think of producers as the bottom box on a stack of boxes. If you take away that bottom box, what's going to happen to all those other boxes? They're going to crash, right? So our producers are our base, our very important part of the food web. Next, we have our first consumers, who are herbivores, which means they only eat plants. They only eat producers. Next, we have our second consumers, who are our carnivores and omnivores. Carnivores eat only meat or other animals, and omnivores eat both meat and plants. At the top, we have our top or apex predators, and these are mostly carnivores. And top predators are animals in an ecosystem that don't have other predators. Sometimes they have a predator who is also a top predator, but for the most part, top predators do not have another predator. And in the red circle here to the side will be our decomposers, who, remember, are breaking down our dead things to get energy and putting that energy back into the soil as well for the producers to bring back up and bring through to pass through the food chain. Okay, so here is a picture of our maritime forest. You may recognize this if you've been to our aquarium at Fort Fisher. This is right up the road, the Fort Fisher Civil War site. And a maritime forest is a forest that grows close to the ocean. That prefix "mari," like marine life or marine biology, refers to the ocean. So a maritime forest is a forest that grows close to the ocean. So before we talk about the living things, let's look at our non-living, our abiotic factors of the maritime forest. Our sunlight in the maritime forest is actually not very strong. The trees provide great shade in the maritime forest, so it's usually a nice cool area for animals to cool down that might be hot from being on the beach. If you've ever been to the beach before, you know that it can get very hot and very sunny. So the maritime forest provides a nice little cool refuge for those areas, for those animals to go to when they get too hot. The ground of the maritime forest is usually made of dirt and sand. Since it is so close to the ocean, there's usually some sand in that dirt. And the water, there is usually not a lot of water. Sometimes there are temporary ponds that form in the maritime forest, but for the most part, there isn't a lot of water. There is water nearby, though, that does affect the maritime forest, which is our ocean. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so I think those are all of our non-living factors. So our living factors, again, in this food web pyramid, our producers are going to be on the bottom. So the first producer that you see are these trees here. These are called live oak trees. And you'll notice that they are growing sideways. I didn't slant that picture. They are growing sideways. And that is because of the ocean salt spray. So in this picture here, the ocean would be over to the right. And when waves crash, some salt water and salt comes off of those waves. We call it salt spray. And because it literally sprays salt onto those plants. And these plants do not like the salt water. It makes them dehydrated. It makes them lose a lot of their water. So they don't like the salt water. So they grow away from it so that they don't have to get hit by that salt spray, which is pretty cool. If you've been to Fort Fisher, you'd recognize these trees as well, because they're pretty famous trees because they grow sideways like that. If you have not been to Fort Fisher, I encourage you to visit and to check out those sideways trees, which are really awesome. Another plant that grows in the maritime forest is our yaupon holly. And you may know American holly from Christmas time. American holly has those spiky leaves and those bright red berries. So yaupon holly still has those bright red berries, but their leaves are rounded instead of pointy, like our Christmas holly. The next plant is our wax myrtle tree, and it's called a wax myrtle tree because their berries, which you can see here, are covered in a layer of wax, and Native Americans actually used to boil down those berries, extract that wax, and make candles from it, which is pretty cool. And these trees smell very good if you walk by them with the berries. Then our last one is our palmetto tree or our palm tree, which would also be in the maritime forest. Next in our pyramid is our first consumers, which remember are our herbivores, which means they are eating plants. They are eating our producers. The first one is our white-tailed deer, and these guys mostly eat grass and leaves and maybe some berries too. We also have birds in the maritime forest. This bird is a painted bunting. It's a really important bird here in southeastern North Carolina. And it's always amazing to me because these birds are so brightly colored. You wouldn't think that they'd be very good at camouflaging or blending into their surroundings, but they're actually really difficult to see. Those bright colors help them to blend in really well. And lastly, we have some bugs or insects that would also be herbivores and eat the grass and seeds and any plants. Next, we have our secondary consumers, which are going to be our omnivores, which remember means they eat both meat and plants, and our carnivores, which eat meat. And so remember when we look at our pyramid and when we think about first consumers and second consumers, the second consumers aren't necessarily eating our first consumers. That's not really how that works. So remember, our secondary consumers are omnivores and carnivores, and our first primary consumers are our herbivores. Because if we look at this, a raccoon is not eating a deer or a bird. Raccoons are omnivores, so they eat meat and plants. They would probably eat maybe bugs and other berries and other things. And then our frogs are also obviously not eating our deer or our bird. They're going to eat bugs as well and are carnivores. This frog here is a green tree frog. And our top predator for our food web pyramid is our red-shouldered hawk or other birds of prey. These birds of prey really like to eat the smaller mammals that are in the maritime forest, as well as some amphibians and reptiles also. And lastly, we have our decomposers, which are our earthworm and mushrooms here. So remember, decomposers are breaking down dead things to get their energy and then putting that energy back into the soil so that our producers can take that energy back up and pass it through the rest of the food web. Okay, so that is our maritime forest food web, biotic and abiotic factors. So most importantly about ecosystems is to learn how we can protect ecosystems. Did you know that we, our humans, are the top predator of all animals on Earth? And because of that, it's our responsibility to make sure that those animals below us stay safe. And so what we need to do is help protect their ecosystems. One thing we can do is to make sure their ecosystems stay clean. Do you want to live in a house full of trash, other people's trash that would never go away? Probably not. So we don't want our animals to live like that either. And plastic is one of the main things that ends up in their ecosystems, and plastic never goes away. It might break down into smaller pieces, but a piece of plastic that goes in the ocean today will be in there forever. So we want to try not to use single-use plastic, which is plastic that we use one time and recycle it or throw it away. Recycling is really great, but it's even better to try to reduce our use of that single-use plastic. A few ways we can do that is by using refillable water bottles rather than those plastic one-time use water bottles that you just recycle. By using these refillable ones, we aren't wasting those single-use plastic water bottles. We can also use reusable grocery bags, which help not to have to use those plastic grocery bags at the grocery store. Another thing is to use reusable straws. These ones here are glass, but you can also get metal ones. Or you could also use paper straws as well. They aren't reusable, but they would help to not use that plastic straw. Plastic straws end up in our oceans, and a lot of times animals eat those plastic straws. So we want to try not to use those plastic straws. You can also do something called skip the straw, where you just don't use a plastic straw. So those are some 3 simple ways that we can try to eliminate single-use plastic from what we do. The easiest thing you can do to help protect ecosystems is to tell someone in your family, your friends, all about how awesome ecosystems are. And by doing that, we're helping to spread the word and helping other people learn about how important ecosystems are. And another thing you can do with this is to take your family or friends to ecosystems to explore. You can explore, you don't have to go far to explore ecosystems. Your backyard, your front yard can be an ecosystem. Even your own home, this is my ecosystem here, is considered an ecosystem. So by sharing your love of ecosystems and your knowledge of ecosystems can really help those animals. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all have a great day, and I encourage you all to go out and explore those ecosystems. When you explore ecosystems, try to do what I did in that maritime forest example. Think about the non-living factors and how those biotic living factors are going to be affected by those abiotic factors in that ecosystem. Okay, so thank you all again, and hope you have a great day. Bye.